Hi, let's debrief problem 6. I'm only going to do one of the quiz versions, but the other one is very similar. Write a method called none-even, which will return true if none of the values in the array are even. So there's two levels of what I'm testing here. One is, can you loop over every element of the array and test it for something? Is it even? But the second is paying attention to the logic of the situation, because I'm not trying to find an even thing. I'm trying to decide if none of the things in the array are even. So let's do a correct version first, and then let's look at several of the most popular kind of logical confusions. So here's a correct version. Almost. So here is the conventional way of starting at index 0, going all the way to the end of the list. Just a quick note. Let's say this was my array. Array.length is 3, but notice that the last index is 2. So that's why I, which I'm using as the index that I'm accessing, is smaller than array.length. Because if array.length is 3, I want the largest thing I will ever be to be smaller than 3. It'll be 2. So that makes sure I don't try and access off the end of the list. Okay, so I'm looping over all the locations in the array. This is how I actually get a value out of the array. Some people forgot to access the array. They just had the single variable I in here. But those are the index numbers. They're not the actual values that you might see inside the array itself. So once I have the value from the array itself, I ask if it's even this way. Pretty much everybody seems to understand that. Okay, so what should I do if I find an even number? So if I find an even number, I know that it's not true that there are no evens. So it would make sense to return false right away. Because if I'm trying to figure out if there are no evens, the moment I see one, I'm done. I don't have to check anything else. Some people put an else statement here and said else return false. The problem with that is it's going to return right away only after checking one element. So let's imagine that version. I get the number 17. I say, is it even? The answer is no. So it would go to the else statement and then return false. Return true, meaning that none are even. But it doesn't make sense to return true yet because we haven't checked the other values. So what we'll do is, if we see an even number, we can exit right away because we know it's not true that there aren't any evens. Otherwise, we're going to finish all the way to the bottom of the loop, and that's when we can return true. Because if we never exited, then we know that there must have been only odd numbers, and so there aren't any evens. So this is my favorite version of a correct solution. A lot of people made a counter, and they counted up how many odd values were there. And then at the very end, after the loop, they said, if the number of odd values that the counter has is the same as the array length, then we would return true, otherwise false. That version works great. This is just a little bit more compact because we don't need to actually count anything up. We can just look for the thing that would let us know the answer right away. Let's do another. So I already told you one of the logical errors was having the else statement here on the inside. Another logical error was putting this return statement inside the loop. And I think that was mostly just people neglecting to think about where it should go. The way the AP grades is it's okay if you forget curly braces as long as your indentation shows whether you intend for a statement to be inside the loop or not. Remember that if you are inside a code block, all of the lines need to be indented. So, for example, let's say I had forgotten to write this curly brace. If I had written my return true statement here, that implies that it's not inside the loop. So I would have given that credit. If you had written everything lined up down there, then I would have assumed that it is inside the block because it's consistent with how you were writing other stuff inside the block, and so I wouldn't have given credit for that. So the lesson is either be very careful about your bracing and make sure that you are indenting lines that are supposed to be inside a code block. Let's do one more logical error. A couple of people had something like this. So they're looping through the array. Instead of testing to see if there's an even value, they're testing to see if there's an odd value. And if there's an odd value, they return true that none are even. It's a little bit too early to decide that, because let's say the first value is 17. We'd say, aha, we found an odd value. Therefore, it's true that none of them are even. The problem is, it could be that all the rest of the values are even. So again, I wanted to see if you were paying attention to the logic of the situation, not just do you know how to loop over and test things, but do you know what it makes sense to test for and how you would know whether the condition was true or not, whether the overall fact about all the values in the array were true. Okay, so I'm going to make a whole bunch of variations on this problem. You can practice to your heart's content. Good luck.